For musicians who dislike the Rolling Stones. Which musician said, "It would be terrible to be like Keith Richards." The Rolling Stones are generally considered one of the greatest rock bands of all time. Despite their high standing, there are always critics. Here are 3 musicians who publicly express their hatred for the Rolling Stones. So if you're Rolling Stones fan or simply curious about this band, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, and let's dive in. Lemmy Kilmister. Lemmy, the iconic frontman of Motorhead, known for his raw vocals, gritty bass playing, and no-nonsense attitude, was never one. Lemmy believes that the Stones themselves were guilty, undermining their rock and roll image and suggesting a lack of sincerity. "I went to go see the Rolling Stones in the park and they were awful, completely out of tune." Lemmy once said, "The Rolling Stones were the Mummy's boys, they were all college students from the outskirts of London. They went to starve in London, but it was by choice, to give themselves some sort of aura of disrespectability." He clearly felt that this deception also symbolized the lack of true roots in their actual music. Furthermore, Kilmister claimed that the Stones could never compare to the Beatles in terms of humor, originality, songs, or stage pres. John Lennon. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones were 2 of the most popular and influential bands of the 1960s. Lennon noticed their professional rivals, the Rolling Stones, were trying to keep up with them more than anyone else. And eventually, he called the band's frontman, Mick Jagger, out for mimicking their work. Lennon frequently made a large number of ill-considered and often purposely controversial statements in his time. "We're bigger than Jesus." He loved to be seen as unique, a poet, a writer, an avant-garde artist ahead of his time. Lennon envisioned himself to be clearly superior to, not just to fellow Beatles but also to all other rock bands as well, and that included the Rolling Stones. "Everything we did, Mick does exactly the same, he imitates us. I resent the implication that the Stones are like revolutionaries and that the Beatles weren't. They are not in the same class, music-wise or power-wise, and never were." Elton John's. Keith Richards is an irreplaceable member of the Rolling Stones, just like lead singer Mick Jagger. The 2 have been a part of the band since the beginning and have led the Stones to become one of the most successful rock bands ever. While most people know how essential they are to the band, Elton John once delivered a hot take by saying the Stones would have been better if they had gotten rid of Keith Richards. In a 1988, Keith publicly described Elton as a lovely bloke, but posing. Elton responded with a sharp personal jab at Keith. "It would be awful to be like Keith Richards. He's pathetic, the poor guy. I have great respect for the Stones, but they would have been better off if they'd kicked Keith out 15 years ago." Ginger Baker. The legendary Cream drummer had no problem in saying that he dined like a band or that the musicians in it were bad. Baker acknowledged that he was a good friend of Stones drummer Charlie Watts, but not to the extent that he thought he, or any of his bandmates, were good musicians. He also disagreed that they were good songwriters. And with this, one gets the impression that the only musician he's ever heard and thought was good is himself. Over the years he always said that he hated the Rolling Stones but he liked Charlie Watts. He even said that by far the drummer was the greatest musician in the band. In an interview with Classic Rock back in 2019, Baker talked about Charlie and the Stones, saying, "I like Charlie. He's a good friend since the old jazz days and he's perfect for the Stones. He got me a gig with Alexis, Corners Blues Incorporated. I recommended him for the Stones. But I hate the Stones and always have done." Throughout a music career spanning 6 decades, the Rolling Stones have defined what rock and roll is. They have maintained a permanent place in music history, influencing generations of musicians greatly.